All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. So check it out. This one's gonna be a short one. I'm gonna start putting out short stories like this in between some of the longer stories. I know some of you guys like the longer stories, but I want to try to get some of these short stories out to you guys as well so that I can try to get more content out. Anyways, this story right here is called Southside Players. Give me some feedback in the comments. Let me know what you think. Anyways, I got a couple that I want to try to get out to you guys. So without further ado, let me get straight to it. Like I said, this one's going to be a short one. It's basically about a gang member from a neighborhood in Southgate called the Southside Players. The thing about this story is that it clearly demonstrates the potential consequences that are involved when a young gang member throws his entire life away over some senseless acts of gangbanging. Not only that, but also how sometimes brash or split-second decisions can sometimes result in life-altering, permanent, irreversible consequences. So for all you aspiring youngsters out there who still seem to think that gangbanging is cool, this one's for you. So this story starts out at a house party that took place on January 9th, 2009 in Southgate, California. Jose Gonzalez, Payaso, Danny Salazar, Green Eyes, Ruben Ruiz, Chucky, Mario Ortiz, Criminal, and Francisco Cruz, Snoopy, were all members of the Southside Players gang who were at this party. And there was no defining purpose for this party. It wasn't a birthday celebration. It wasn't a quinceañera. It wasn't a sporting event or nothing along those lines. This was simply just a party that was being thrown by the Southside Players gang for social purposes and to basically drink and to get turned up. And all these guys were around the same age. They were in their early to mid 20s. And in my opinion, for gang members that are evolving in this lifestyle, this is around the time and age when most gang members are at the peak of establishing their reputations on the streets, and they're just coming into themselves. They're just now starting to establish themselves within that world. Most of them are still of the mindset of trying to prove themselves, and they're more prone to commit acts of violence just for the purpose of gaining recognition for it, just to show out and prove that they're capable of doing it. So that's what Payaso did. He waited another 20 minutes, he drank a couple more beers, smoked another blunt, and then along with Green Eyes, Snoopy, and Chucky, they all jumped in his ride and they went to Reckless's house and they picked up the gun. And the whole reason why Payaso was picking up this gun is because when they were still at the party, Payaso, Green Eyes, Chucky, and Snoopy had talked about hitting a lick. They needed to make some quick money, so they had planned to go out and jack somebody in the neighborhood. And for those of you that don't know what a lick is street slang for a robbery. So they all agreed after drinking a couple more beers that they leave the party and then they drive around in their neighborhood and they look for somebody to jack. So they all agreed that after drinking a couple more beers that they leave and then they'd make some quick money by jacking somebody in their neighborhood. And that's what they did. They drank a couple more beers, then they jumped in Payaso's white Tahoe, and then they took off. So Payaso, he was basically safekeeping his handgun at Reckless's house because he was on probation. And he didn't want to take a chance of his probation officer coming by and doing a random search. As long as you're on probation, there's always the risk of law enforcement coming by and doing a random search. So if you're on probation, it's always smart to keep your contraband somewhere else. But this particular gun that Payaso was keeping at Reckless's house, it would jam every time he fired it. Every time he fired it one time, it would always jam. There was something about that gun that he obviously liked because instead of getting a new gun or having that one fixed, he held on to it. But he had a firing method that would clear the gun anytime he fired it. He knew that gun better than anybody. But anytime he'd fire it, he had a method that would clear it anytime it would jam or malfunction. So after Payaso goes to Reckless's house and he gets the gun, he drives up the street to a small park on Chestnut Avenue and then he gets out the car. So the whole reason why Payaso went to this park was so that he could shoot the gun into an embankment, a small mound of dirt, to make sure, one, that the gun would shoot, and two, to make sure that he could clear it, just in case they had to use it. So by the time they got to this park, it was already close to being about 8:30 that evening. It was dark outside, the park was in the cuts, so Payaso, he wasn't worried about being identified. He was gonna shoot the gun real quick, clear it, jump back in his Tahoe, and then they were gonna take off. So Payaso, he walks into the park and he walks all the way to the back where he knows the dirt's at, and he pulls the gun out of his waistband that he had wrapped in a blue bandana. He points the gun at a patch of dirt and he pulls the trigger one time. As expected, the gun jams, so he takes it and he smacks it against a tree to clear it, and then he fires a second time. The gun fires again, but this time in haste, Payaso has a brain lapse and he forgets to clear the gun a second time before he jumps back in his Tahoe and he takes off. So he's basically riding around with a gun that's jammed right now. If he ends up getting in a situation where he needs to shoot that gun, the gun's jammed. So anyways, as they're driving down Chestnut Avenue, Snoopy, who's sitting shotgun, tells Payaso to stop the car. He tells him stop the car, that he's gonna get some D real quick and that he's only gonna be a few minutes. He's gonna go around the corner, jack some fools real quick for their D, and he'll be right back. Payaso doesn't like it. He thinks it's messy. He tells Snoopy, he's like, hey bro, be careful. There's a lot of cops out right now. He's like, you don't need to do that. We can go down by Independence and we can hit some licks down there. But Snoopy was dead set on hitting this lick. He's like, hey bro, he's like, don't trip. I'm strapped. It's only gonna take me a couple of minutes. I'm gonna go around the corner. There's a trap house. I'll take what these fools got. I'll be right back. It only take me about 2 or 3 minutes. So he leaves. So a few minutes after Snoopy jumped out of the car and he walks around the corner, they hear several gunshots that come from the same direction that Snoopy had just walked off in. So as soon as Payaso hears the gunshots, he starts the car. Now there's a sense of urgency. They're sitting there waiting for Snoopy to come back, and Payaso, he tells the other two, I hope this fool hurries up and comes back. He's like, the Hooters are gonna be here any minute. As soon as he says that, Snoopy comes running around the corner. He runs up to the car, he jumps in, he tells him, go, take off, bro, hurry up, take off. So obviously something happened. Nobody in the car says nothing, nobody asks. In a situation like that, you don't ask what happened. It's on a need to know basis. But Snoopy, he's talking to himself and he says something to the effect of, I ain't never seen a fool drop like that. Indicative that he just shot somebody. But they take off. And Snoopy was obviously concerned about what had just happened. And this was something that both Payaso and Chucky would both attest to later. So again, Snoopy, he's not offering any information, but he's sweating and he's in a hurry to get up out of there. And per his request, he tells Payaso, hey, just drive down to Independence and let me off, bro. I need to get rid of this gun. And that street Independence, that was an area that they were all familiar with because they had another homeboy that was from the Southside Players gang named Criminal that lived close by Independence. So Payaso would also later say that when Snoopy got out of his Tahoe, that this is when he seen Snoopy with what looked like a rifle that was wrapped in a blue towel. So after Snoopy got out of the car, they all watched him cross some railroad tracks and then disappear in the direction that they all knew Criminal lived in. So by this time, it's around 10:30 p.m. And there was an individual by the name of Daniel Ramirez, who goes by Termite, who was standing outside of his house on Chestnut Avenue with another individual named Adolfo Rincon, who goes by Blackie, and a third individual who's only known as Travis. According to statements that these guys would later make, they claimed that while they were standing outside of Termite's house on Chestnut Avenue, that a light-colored sports utility vehicle drove by them twice before stopping. After it stopped, an individual got out of the vehicle and started walking towards them, asking for someone named Andrew. According to what these guys said, this guy that was walking towards them, he got close enough and then he said, Players. Termite responded by saying, Pobre, a derogatory term of disrespect. And then they claimed that this guy that said Players then pulled out a rifle and started shooting at him. After he took a couple of shots, he turned around and he ran back up Chestnut Avenue. And these guys were fortunate because nobody got hit. Either Snoopy was a real bad shot or he wasn't trying to hit him, because apparently he was right up on him when he started shooting. And he should have hit him, but apparently nobody got hit. So after the initial shooting on Chestnut Avenue and after Payaso dropped Snoopy off on Independence, Payaso apparently got back on Chestnut, and as soon as he started driving back up Chestnut, he got lit up and pulled over by a local law enforcement officer by the name of Marcelo Bandetti, who was a Southgate police officer. Because apparently at around the same time that Payaso and this officer were crossing paths on Garden View Avenue, Officer Bandetti received a bolo. Be on the lookout for a white sports utility vehicle that was involved in a shooting. And because of the nature of the stop and due to the fact that there were multiple people in the Tahoe, several other officers arrived on the scene for backup. Those officers included David Sanchez, Daniel Barnaby, Antonio Mendez, Humberto Gutierrez, and Sergeant Hannah Campos. So at this point, they hadn't made any arrests yet. But because this vehicle fit the description of a vehicle that was involved in a shooting, they proned these guys out, they pulled them out of the vehicle one at a time, and then they separated them, putting them in different squad cars. And they basically did this so that they could interrogate these guys separately and to also perform what's called a field investigation. You know, even though these officers didn't have any substantial information that led them to believe that these were the guys that were involved in this shooting, there was something about their appearance or their demeanor that made them suspicious. So they put them in handcuffs and they told them that they were just detaining them until they finished their investigation. But these guys, they still weren't in the vehicles at that point. They were putting them in separate vehicles one at a time. You know, my guess is that Payaso, Chucky, and Green Eyes were probably nervous because Payaso was still strapped and they knew they were gonna find that gun. The gun that they picked up from Reckless's house, the one that would always jam, Payaso still had it in his waistband. So anyways, while all this was going on, Snoopy was still about a half block up, hiding somewhere in the trees. But where Snoopy was at, he had a clear vantage point of everything that was going on. He could see all the cars, he could see his boys, and he could see everything that was happening. And apparently all Snoopy kept thinking was that this was his fault. He kept thinking that his boys got pulled over because of the shooting that he did on Chestnut Avenue. That if he would have never done that shooting, they would have never got pulled over, and Payaso never would have got caught with that gun that he knew he had in his waistband. So as the officers began to put Payaso, Green Eyes, and Chucky into separate vehicles, all of a sudden, multiple gunshots rang out, and several of the officers heard loud bullets whizzing over their heads. So Snoopy let off one long burst of gunfire, shooting about 10 or 15 bullets. Then he let off a second burst of gunfire until his 30-round clip was empty. Needless to say, these cops, they hit the deck. Bullets started tearing into their cars like a tin can. So according to the police reports, after hearing the gunshots, Officer Sanchez pushed Chucky into the back of his car and then he hit the deck. He got the hell out of the way. While at the same time, Officer Bandetti claimed that he seen sparks hit the cement a couple of feet from where he was crouching and that he heard a loud, intense whizzing sound from the gunfire. And apparently he claimed that he saw two bullets hit the ground between his legs right next to him. The rest of the officers claimed that they heard loud popping sounds and they seen sparks in different areas from where the bullets were obviously striking. So as for Snoopy, he was hoping that this would create enough of a distraction so that his boys could get away. But that obviously backfired. After he emptied his clip, he ran through a couple of backyards, he hid his gun behind a tree, and then he disappeared into a park before leaving the area. So there was also a homeowner named Miguel Lopez who was inside his home on Garden View Avenue when he claimed he heard several gunshots. And after looking out one of his side windows, Lopez said that he seen a guy get into the rear passenger side of a vehicle before taking off at a high rate of speed. So within minutes of this shooting on Garden View Avenue, law enforcement flooded the area with officers from Southgate, Linwood, Hollydale, Bell Gardens, and Cudahy, which isn't a surprise because this involved a situation where someone was actively shooting at police officers. SWAT and police helicopters equipped with infrared heat-seeking technology were also called out as well. And despite law enforcement setting up a perimeter that covered a 3 square mile radius and performing an extensive grid search, nobody was arrested that night. So later that night, officers that were assigned to investigate this incident were able to recover 6 .30 caliber cartridge casings in a vehicle that was also struck by gunfire. So at around midnight, 2 hours later, just when these guys were wrapping up their investigation, another resident named George Duenas, who also lived on Garden View Avenue, went outside because he heard ghetto birds flying above his house. He was basically being a nosy neighbor. However, while Duenas was performing a security check on his own property, apparently he found a .30 caliber rifle that had been thrown behind a tree that sits on his property. And out of concern for not wanting kids to find the weapon, Duenas claimed that he recovered the weapon and took it inside his house. So after the shooting, Payaso, Chucky, and Green Eyes were all taken to the local police station for questioning. And obviously, when these officers pulled these guys out of their vehicles to do a pat down, this is when they found the gun that Payaso had in his waistband. So he ended up picking up a gun case, and obviously he now had a reason to turn on Snoopy and give him up. And later on, that's exactly what he did. You know, I'm not sure if the others were charged with anything at that point, but at some point, Snoopy ended up getting arrested for the shooting that happened on Chestnut. And at some point, all these guys were in the county jail together. And while they were in the county jail, this is when Snoopy admitted to Payaso, Chucky, and Green Eyes that he was the one that shot at the police, and that his whole reason for shooting at him was so that these guys could get away. That he was trying to avoid seeing these guys get arrested. That's why he shot at him. And that furthermore, that nobody had put in as much work for his neighborhood than him. That's the whole reason why he shot at these cops. It sounded more like he was bragging and boasting, and I've talked about this in some of my other stories. That's never going to end well for you. That's always going to end bad. And unfortunately for Snoopy, he ended up learning this the hard way. You know, the cool part about this story is that Snoopy felt some sense of responsibility for getting his boys caught up. And although I would never advocate or promote anybody ever shooting at the cops, what I will say is that he had good intentions. He wanted to see his boys get away. However, this case, it was a messy case, and all of his boys ended up turning on him. So with regard to the shooting that took place on Chestnut Avenue, Snoopy would later say that he was under the impression that he was being confronted by some Florencia 13 gang members, and that's the whole reason why he shot at him. He said that he went to a trap house that was on that street, and that he'd heard that there was some Florencia gang members that were slinging their D from that house. And originally he was going to try to jack them. He was going to try to take their shit. But that something happened. He must have seen something spooked him, and he started shooting. The Southside Players gang and Florencia 13 are mortal enemies, and they've been involved in a back and forth rivalry for years. However, the Southside Players gang is a very small gang in comparison to Florencia 13. So most of their conflicts or most of their skirmishes have been small. Either when these guys occasionally cross paths or just by chance and opportunity when they end up seeing each other. So anyways, after seeing the local news that night, George Duenas, the resident who found the rifle behind his house, he later contacted the police and turned the rifle over, which ended up being all bad for Snoopy. Ballistics obviously ended up matching the shell casings to the weapon, and they were even able to lift latent prints that came back to Snoopy. So this case ended up being a slam dunk for him. So in the end, Chucky and Payaso, they both ended up cooperating, and they testified against Snoopy at his trial. Any chance he might have had at beating this case on a technicality or a constitutional violation ended up being a wash after they turned on him. So Snoopy was ultimately convicted on multiple counts stemming from both shootings, and he was sentenced to 62 years, 8 months to life in prison, all behind a few senseless acts of gangbanging, and because Snoopy was trying to prove his loyalty to fellow members of his gang. The same fellow gang members who ended up testifying against him and who had no qualms about helping the district attorney put nails in his coffin. Anyways, I know this was a short one, but I just wanted to put a quick story out there that might act as an eye-opener for some of those youngsters out there that are still finding glory in this lifestyle. But like I said, even though this one was extra short, it might not have encompassed some of the content matter that I usually talk about. Hopefully, you guys still enjoyed hearing about it. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys liked this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I just want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support and for just continuing to support this channel. With that said, you guys enjoy your week. Keep pushing that positivity. Until the next one, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.